Normally in these videos I like to give my own opinion on the person I'm talking about, trying to get you interested in him and in his music. I suppose the music is the more important part of it. But most of this, in this one, is going to be from the very nice book called Clifford Brown, The Life and Art of the Legendary Jazz Trumpeter by Nick Catalano. And that's the book. And I've got lots of things I want to read. And I'll probably do some fill-in stuff as well. The main listening I've done, well, most of it is on YouTube, but I have that CD, which is the definitive Clifford Brown Max Roach set of masters, and this is the box set of all Clifford's recordings in his short life. So the first reading is going to be about the band. It says, Richie Powell's legendary brother Bud, that's Bud Powell of famous pianist, had composed a brilliant piece called Parisian Thoroughfare a few years previously to commemorate his hiatus in France. That hiatus was commemorated in the film called Round Midnight, starring Dexter Gordon, but the real story wasn't a saxophonist, it was Bud Powell, the pianist. But the story is pretty well true. With the imaginative energy, the band once again introduces a tune with a vamp borrowed cleverly from Gershwin's An American in Paris. Yes, I didn't realise that at first. When I first heard it, I was bowled over by the introduction, and I thought it was a bit familiar, but I didn't quite twig that it was from American in Paris. The rhythm captures the busy streets of Paris, and Clifford Brown's trumpet blares out the sound of the traffic with reference to the Marseillaise. And it's very good. I love that tune. The band consists of the two leaders, Clifford Brown and Max Roach. And Max Roach was a founder drummer of bebop. He was included in the great recording called Quintet of the Year, which starred Charlie Parker on alto sax, Dizzy Gillespie on trumpet, Bud Powell on piano, Charles Mingus on bass, and of course Max Roach on drums. And they have this thing, these drummers, that their accents no longer keep the time. Their bass drum no longer is the timekeeper for the band, but it's there to do accents, and that was called dropping the bombs in those days because it was so novel. This second reading is about Clifford's early years and his early promise. It says, I asked Bosie Lowry, who was the leader of a little band that Clifford was in, to evaluate Clifford Brown as a student. He quickly responded that Clifford was not the most talented in his group. Charlie Robertson, I thought, would be better, he said. Well, what do you think eventually made Clifford so proficient? I inquired. Boise looked at me hard again. Because he was determined to succeed, he said, slapping his hand down hard on the sofa arm to emphasise the word determined. And that seems to be the way with a lot of successful people. I remember Bill Evans, him saying about himself that he wasn't a very gifted pianist, and the group he was in, there were a lot more gifted pianists, but they weren't that interested in it. But he wanted to be a jazz pianist, and so he succeeded. So they made Clifford and Max Roach made a band together, and somebody said of Clifford that he was a very lucky man, and his wife said at the time, "Oh, it's funny, the more he practices, the luckier he becomes." So, so this little reading here is like an early warning sign. So I don't know if you know, but Clifford Brown died at a very early age in a car accident, and this is a previous incident. It says, the gigs that the Maryland State Band booked took them all over the state. While they drove to their jobs, the musicians traded ideas and constantly sought new musical projects. In the spring semester, the band was busy playing more than their share of dances and parties, and on the evening of June the 6th, after a particularly successful outing, spirits were high. Brownie and 3 of his cohorts were happily motoring along when a deer suddenly sprang out from the roadside. The car swerved to avoid hitting the animal, skidding out of control, overturned and crashed. The driver and his girlfriend were killed. Brownie and the other occupant were critically injured and rushed to hospital. As soon as Clifford's family and friends heard the news, they hurried to his bedside and learned that his injuries were so extensive that his life was in the balance. As the family waited and prayed, an announcement finally came. Clifford Brown had broken bones throughout his legs and the right side of his torso. He would need a full body cast to reset his frame and would remain hospitalized indefinitely. His music career, his college education, and all the progress that he had made in jazz were abruptly halted. Visitors were shocked as he lay in bed, broken like a china doll. Incredibly, in a short time after his catastrophe, Sam Turner was killed in another car accident. Sam Turner was the leader of the little group that Clifford was in. The Maryland State Band had lost their best voices in one fell swoop. This is part of the consequences of his first accident. Despite the popularity of the band and the new musical horizons that were opening up for Brownie, because that's what Clifford Brown gets called, Brownie, he was still suffering from his auto accident injuries. Wilson recalled a time when the band members were riding in a limousine that sat about 9 people. He and I were sitting in the middle seat, and the doors opened the opposite way. The door came open on Brownie's side, so he went to yank the door closed with his bad arm. The arm went out of his socket, and Wilson grabbed him because the wind grabbed the door and we were moving pretty fast. I grabbed him and kept him from going out. The pain was excruciating, and this kind of thing happened repeatedly. The agony that Brownie went through putting his arm back in its socket and adjusting the limb in a sling was shocking to his fellow musicians. On another occasion in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Brownie was untypically late for the job. The Flames, that's the name of the band he was in, were wondering what happened to him. He telephoned to tell them that he was driving Ida May's Cadillac. Now, Ida May was his girlfriend at the time, and she was very flamboyant. She used to love it, dressing in tight red clothes, and somebody wrote a little tune called Ida Red about her. And I don't think they were really in love, because when Clifford broke up with her, or actually she broke up with Clifford, they said goodbye to each other, and she went to where he was ostensibly to meet him, but she met loads of other people instead and didn't actually meet Clifford. Anyway, she was driving Ida May's Cadillac because I think she was quite well and wealthy and she had a Cadillac. And Ida May's Cadillac hit a patch of ice and spun round. It appears that he had difficulty driving because of his because he was still weak from his accident. He manoeuvred the Cadillac and finally arrived at the job, but once again the pain must have been severe. He always kept a cane around, said Wilson. Sometimes his arm would jump out of the socket. It would come out at the least little thing. Not good, really. This is a little bit about other famous trumpeters who were around at that time. And a lot of them have a bigger name than Clifford, but I think that's because they went on. Clifford died, and these others, Art Farmer and lots of others, they went on and made a big name for themselves. But this is what Art Farmer says about Clifford. They were in the same band. Very often during the tour, Hampton, that's Lionel Hampton, would call for Brown and Farmer to trade off against each other. Farmer felt like I was fighting for my life. He was marvellously candid about his inability to keep up with Brownie. He was doing what I wanted to do, he said to me, and doing it very well. He was no doubt far advanced. We were about the same age, I guess, but he was far advanced as a trumpet player. And so Lionel, to his credit, didn't take any solos away from me and give them to Brownie. He just opened up the arrangement, and where I had a solo, at least a lot of the times where I had a solo, he would let Brownie come after me. So every time I went out to play, I felt I'd better really do my best, because this guy came behind me and murdered me. That's the way it was. Even though Farmer was under such terrific pressure, he did admit that despite the pressure, it was great to hear someone who really was able to do what I wanted to do. It's a little bit about another famous person. They lived nearish to Pennsylvania, and there seemed to be an awful lot of good jazz musicians from around there. So this is about a fellow called G.G. Grice, and G.G. is G-I-G-I, and I'll tell you how he came by that name when I do a little one of these on him. In the tune Brown Skins, we get a good insight into the writing skills of G.G. Grice. Grice had studied composition with Daniel Pinkham and Alan Hoverness at the New England Conservatory of Music in 1948, and then made his final trip to Paris on the Fulbright Scholarship to study with Nadia Boulanger and Arthur Honegger. He was a brilliant writing talent, but as often happens with someone who is far ahead of his time, G.G. Grice's work remain neglected to the present day. Well, I'll try and do a bit on that. I don't know if I'll do a successful one, but I'll do something. This is a bit about Max Roach, because Clifford Brown and Max Roach were the leaders of the band. And the other members of the band, like Richie Powell, brother of Bud Powell, I've forgotten the name of the bass player, and the tenor sax player, Harold Land. Harold Land did very well in this group. Yeah, I really love all the work he's done in the Clifford Brown Max Roach band. A bit neglected, really. I think he should have been given more prominence. And later on, what's his name? I'll tell you later. Max Roach's trademark as a percussionist had been the fixed pulse ride cymbal rhythm pioneered by Kenny Clarke. Kenny Clarke was actually the first bebop drummer, and he ended up with a modern jazz quartet. Don't think he could have been that ambitious by himself. This approach freed up the other drums so they could supply counter rhythms, layered textures, and new spacings. Above all else, Roach sought to use a variety of tom-toms, each carefully tuned so he could explore the melodic and even harmonic possibilities of percussion. His technique was legendary, but what especially appealed to Brown was the peculiarly quiet sound of the ride cymbal. It allowed the melody instruments a much better opportunity for subtleties and gave bass players new confidence. For a change, the bass could actually be heard. What also appealed to Brownie was Roach's indefatigable chops. That means he could just keep going forever and ever. He could keep steady rhythm support at the metronome tempos that Brownie loved, the meteoric tempos that Brownie loved, and continually challenged his control. They loved very, very fast music. So when I play their tunes, I don't play anything like their tempo. I play them nice and slow. But they're still nice, even slow. I like them. It's a little bit about the home life of Clifford Brown. Roach was amazed at Brownie's structured domestic life. I found out that he had his house that he had bought on Sansom Street in Philadelphia, insured to be paid in case anything happened to him. It's unusual for a young person that age to have that kind of insurance. These are maybe small things to some people, but for musicians it's almost like you don't think about things like that. Max had spent the better part of his career in a world where most musicians lived a predictably bohemian existence. For example, Charlie Parker, who often disappeared for weeks, sleeping in different locations with nobody knowing where he was. In addition, it is certainly true that Parker inspired drug use by many beboppers, resulting in disorganized lifestyles. Most musicians, of course, had some sense of responsibility, but Clifford Brown went far beyond that. He became a role model for so many of his peers, just as they had previously idolized Charlie Parker. Because of Parker, many players used drugs in a foolish attempt to match his genius. Conversely, those influenced by Brown were as eager to emulate his very different lifestyle. Although he was never judgmental, Clifford Brown had very definite views about how jazz players should live. As we have seen, discipline, responsibility, dedication, and proper social behaviour, these things he had learnt from his family. Wherever he worked, these characteristics made deep impressions upon musicians with whom he came in contact. And this is a little bit about Brownie as a father. LaRue, that was his wife, he got away with Ida Red and married LaRue. LaRue remembered Clifford as a new father, and it was Clifford who wanted the children. I don't think LaRue really did want them. I suppose it's not very nice for a woman, but Clifford wanted a child. LaRue remembered Clifford as a new father. He was a fantastic father. He would take the baby, put him on his lap, talk to him, have a whole conversation with him about philosophy, art or music, current events, just anything. Talk. When he would practice, he would lay him across his lap and play something, and he would say, "Now that was so-and-so and so-and-so. I swear to you, our son to this day says he remembers how he remembers some of the things his father said to him. I personally think it's impossible, but who's to say? He was absolutely wonderful with his son." It's back to his music. A study in Brown provided the group with further ammunition for its continuing tour. As LPs of 1954 have kept being released, more and more record buyers showed up at the clubs and concerts. The money was starting to come in for the musicians, but the hassle of the motoring around the tour was grueling. Max Roach recalled, "There were times when we would close in Chicago at 4 a.m, pack up all our gear after working all night, and make a matinee in Philadelphia at 4 p.m. that afternoon. We would play from 4 till 7. Oh, nothing like the modern musicians who play for an hour and think they deserve a half an hour break. We would play from 4 to 7, have a 2-hour break, and come back and play from 9 till 2 the rest of the week, and do a matinee on Friday and Saturdays." I think they work really hard. Following the group's successful first week at the Blue Note in Philadelphia, Max Roach was involved in an automobile accident. Seems to happen all the time. Suffering minor injuries, he took a few days to recuperate. Such accidents were not uncommon among road musicians. The extraordinary amount of time musicians spent driving from one gig to another created a serious problem. They were constantly tired from the long hours they had to play, and many times they had to drive long hours at night over roads that are often in need of repair. With Roach out, the group did not have to look far for a replacement. Art Blakey sat in for Roach for 5 days. And Art Blakey, maybe do a video on him one day as well, because he's got a lot to him. And the last reading is sad. In any event, there was jam session activity going on in town that night, for when Clifford Brown left Philadelphia for Chicago with Richie and Nancy Powell — Nancy was Richie's wife — it was late evening. Roach believes that Brownie started out driving, but then turned over the keys to Powell and retreated to the back seat to take a nap. After a while, Powell decided, contrary to Roach's edict, to turn over the wheel to Nancy, and she wasn't a very good driver, so I think they'd been warned about not letting her drive. It was raining heavily that night, and the Pennsylvania Turnpike was badly rain-slicked. After stopping for gas outside of Bedford, Pennsylvania, shortly after midnight, Nancy resumed driving. A short distance down the road, after gaining considerable speed, she failed to negotiate a curve and struck the guardrail. The car then careened across the road, hit a bridge abutment overlooking Route 220, jumped the barrier, rolled down a 75-foot embankment. Clifford Brown, Richie and Nancy Powell were instantly killed. A piece in the Bedford Gazette on June the 28th indicates that the accident was one of several occurring at the turnpike in this area in the past few weeks, raising the death toll to 8 people. The news of the accident quickly spread to Brownie's family in Wilmington, where Joe and Estella, his mum and dad, were devastated to hear of the death of their youngest child. In Los Angeles, a 23-year-old Clifford Brown, so his wife, was suddenly widowed with a 6-month-old son. When Max Roach arrived in Chicago, his agent told him the news, and Max said, "I locked myself in the hotel room and finished 2 bottles of cognac." He would mourn his friend for a long time to come. When news of the tragedy reached the media that Clifford Brown's life had ended so suddenly and violently, the jazz world went into deep mourning. One of the major jazz voices had been stilled at an inordinately young age, 25 years old.